Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, the best book I've read so far this year, Butcher by Joyce Carol Oates. So this is only the fourth book I've read by Joyce Carol Oates, but it has definitely made me want to read more by her. The book I'd read previously by her, which this most reminded me of, was her novel Zombie, which is about a serial killer and is told largely from the serial killer's perspective, as this is told largely from the central character's perspective. And like Zombie, this is a book really that's about the abuse of power. It's about someone who has privilege, who uses that privilege to do awful things to less privileged people. That central message is the same in both books, but this, I think, takes things to a slightly different level and is more effective. It felt to me like a more rounded book overall. Zombie is like incredibly horrific. Butcher is incredibly horrific as well, but there is a vein of humour running through Butcher which I thought lifted it a little bit and makes it a really fascinating read. And the central character in Butcher is just brilliantly portrayed. I found him a fascinating character to read. So let me talk quickly about Joyce Carol Oates and then I'll get into the book a bit more. So a very well established, very well respected American author. She's been publishing books for 62 years now, and during that time she's won a bunch of awards. She's published 58 different novels, I believe, as well as plays, short stories, poetry, non-fiction. So, a significant figure in American 20th century and 21st century literature. And as I say, I definitely want to read more by her. So clearly there is a lot more by her that I can read, which is fantastic. So the central character then of Butcher is a doctor called Silas Weir. So the book is set in the States in the 19th century. And Silas Weir is a doctor who comes to specialise in female psychiatry. So to give the book its full title, it's Butcher, Father of Modern Gyno-Psychiatry. So Weir ends up working in an asylum for women who are ill in various ways, and in particular mentally ill. And they're effectively imprisoned in this asylum. They can't leave unless a doctor deems them to be well enough to leave. And in this asylum, he carries out appalling experiments on the female inmates in order to improve his own kind of surgical technique and to develop different types of surgery that he's working on, but also just to build his understanding of medicine. So he exploits his power, abuses his power to do terrible things for his own betterment, basically. But he's a really fascinating character. So the book is told largely through diary entries and letters by him. There are some letters and diary entries from other characters as well, but the vast majority are from Silas Weir. And he is someone who is at times absolutely horrifying. Many of the things he does are horrifying, but at other times he is kind of borders on the ridiculous. And the book has a vein of humour running through it that is, I found it laugh out loud funny at times, in a way I certainly didn't expect it going into it. And that's part of, I think, the subtlety of this book is the way it blends the two things together, the horror and the humour. And Weir is a character who is so completely self-deluded. He really believes that he is doing noble things, but in fact he is doing terrible things. And clearly the book centres around the dynamic of male doctors and female patients, and there's some fascinating stuff in here about this, and in particular in the early parts of the book when Weir, who is a trained doctor, a licensed doctor, displays complete bafflement and indeed disgust and horror at the female anatomy. So there are parts of this book where he's discussing the female genitalia that read like something from H.P. Lovecraft. He talks about dark abysses and things like that. He has no real concept of what the female anatomy is like, and the way the book describes that lack of knowledge, it's like a typical thing. It's men are not expected to know what their wives look like. They should only make love in the dark, and and so on and so forth. So just this abhorrence of women's bodies is really central to Weir's character, and he does, and many horrible things that he does are graphically described in this book. So do not read it if you think that's gonna be troubling for you. And it's definitely a troubling and disturbing book. So that relationship between male doctors and female patients, definitely central to this book. And it made me reflect back on things like books like The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, that same sense of men and male doctors having control over women and being able to dictate how they are treated and when they are considered to be well as well. But there's also, I think, a strong vein in here about class. So whilst all of the people that wear experiments on are women, they're all also typically of lower social classes to him, and he again has power over them as a result of that. There's a lot of discussion in this book of slavery. So Weir considers himself to be an abolitionist, but there's also a lot of discussion of indentured servitude. So something I didn't really know too much about. I'd heard the term, but didn't know a great deal about it, which is effectively something very similar to slavery, where people typically, like Europeans, like white people, but white people who were considered to be of lower social classes than kind of Anglo-Saxon Americans, so often kind of Italians and Irish people who'd come over to the States, are basically treated like slaves. The difference being that, and in the way it's described in the book, that if a slave gives birth to a child, that child becomes the property of the slave owner, and so there is, to an extent, an incentive for slave owners to let their slaves have children, because it effectively makes more slaves, horrific as that is. Whereas indentured servants, their children are not the property of the master of the indentured servant. So there is less desire, if you like, from the masters for them to have children. So there's a load of stuff in here around that and around the disposability, basically, of these children. So, as I say, really, really awful and horrific stuff. But Weir's character, his complete lack of knowledge to our eyes, his ridiculous lack of knowledge, and his complete self-absorption and self-delusion about the things he is doing, does give the book this element of humour at times as well, which I think makes for a really compelling and beguiling mixture. Those two things together make the book really, really effective, and it's very, very thoughtful in its discussion of these topics. There's a female character who's kind of there through a lot of the book, and her interactions with Weir are really, really interesting. She challenges him at times, and at times it's clear that she's the one who's really making not the decisions, because she wouldn't decide for him to do the terrible things that he does, but when he does make a good decision about a surgical treatment or a way of approaching a patient, it's because of something she suggested rather than something that he's thought up himself. So that relationship between the two of them was really great to read as well. So yeah, I think this is a fantastically good book, but as I say, definitely not for everybody. It's very, very horrific at times. There is, language clearly that's used in this book that is, deliberately appalling to the modern reader. So if that, if you feel like that's not for you, then avoid it. But if you have a taste for, thoughtful, darker fiction, I definitely recommend this. So those are my thoughts on Butcher by Joyce Carol Oates. I really did think it's a fantastic book for people who have the stomach for it. Do let me know if you've read it, and particularly let me know if you've read other books by Joyce Carol Oates that you think I would enjoy. But anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.